18 years ago, the Matrix franchise ended forever, as we thought it had, but now we have our fourth installment in this franchise, The Matrix Resurrections, a movie that I've been very excited for, but at the same time, very nervous for, because I just want a really good Matrix film again, and this is really good. In fact, it's great, and it's near perfect, even with the issues that I have, which we'll talk about. So, it's time to dive into my non-spoiler review for The Matrix Resurrections. What's going on, buddy? Welcome back to a brand new movie review. Today we're going to be discussing the fourth installment in the Matrix franchise, The Matrix Resurrections, a film that I've been pretty excited about, pretty nervous about too. And this, of course, to find out if reality is a physical or mental construct, Mr. Anderson, aka Neo, will have to choose to follow the White Rabbit once more. If he's learned anything, it's that choice, while an illusion, is still the only way out, or maybe even into the Matrix. Neo already knows what he has to do, but what he doesn't yet know is that the Matrix is stronger, more secure, and far more dangerous than ever before. The original Matrix film is one of my favorite films of all time. It's an absolute classic blockbuster that completely changed the sci-fi realm when it first came out. Then 2 and 3 came out, and I'm in the camp that they're not that bad, but they're also not great in my eyes. Like, I think the second one has some great action sequences, and even the third one does too. But when it comes down to the entire story, while the first one I thought was simple, but still hard-hitting with its thematics and even all the convoluted ideas it's trying to get into, it comes across in a simple way that makes it very easy to understand and follow through. 2 and 3 get to the point where it's too convoluted, and while it's not simple anymore and it's trying to dive into so many different possibilities, 2 and 3 I just have never truly loved them. And thankfully, with Resurrections, I almost love this movie. Even though it is near perfect, I had such a blast with this. I can't wait to go and see this again in theaters and take my friends, my family, and really recommend this because I think this is probably the second best Matrix film. I'm currently going through a rewatch, so maybe that'll change when I do my ranking later this week. But this will be a non-spoiler review. I'm going to dive in pretty vaguely into the story in this because the trailers did such a good job at hiding this, so I don't want to disclose any of those big secrets. But I think a lot of Matrix fans are in for a big surprise. But fans who maybe aren't the biggest on The Matrix, I have to say I don't think this will change your mind. And I'm actually really curious to see your guys' thoughts on this because I think there are elements of this film that will be very split down the middle for others. And also, if you haven't seen the first 3 in a while, definitely go rewatch those before seeing this. But the mistake of not doing that, and I was actually quite confused for certain elements of this, but that rewatch will really much emphasize every idea in this film. Of course, before we get any further with this, guys, if you guys are new here and you love talking movies, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as well as comment down below your guys' overall thoughts on The Matrix. Are you excited for this movie? Are you not? Let's discuss it. And also a big shout out to one of the viewers of this channel, Thomas Jones, good friend of the channel, sent me this awesome Christmas sweater, and I just have to wear it. I love Toy Story, and it's the Christmas season. We're getting a new Matrix film. How awesome is that? Honestly, starting with the pros for The Matrix Resurrections, the big thing I can't get enough into this is how I can't believe that this movie is actually real. From the opening scene alone to even the entire first act, you're sitting there in just disbelief of certain things that they are able to recreate and reformat into here to really much make this feel like not just an early 2000s blockbuster in a good way, but in general, the action sequences and alone the sequences that they bring to life in such a meta way. And that word meta is very key to this all. They take the risk of going so meta into this film, especially within probably the first 45 minutes, that again, it might turn off some people, but I loved all the references and Easter eggs that they actually played around with in there. And in fact, it would actually make sense because this film thematically is so strong and dives into the same themes and messages that the original Matrix film had dove into, while also adding in that extra layer of how Hollywood and just in general our society is today with remakes and reboots. And The Matrix Resurrections actually touches on this so greatly that I loved how they were able to do it. And in fact, it plays it off in a very hilarious way that doesn't make it feel like a parody of any sense, but in the same sense of how The Matrix could have brought it about in its own nature. I loved how this movie from each act kind of changes the experience that you're truly having with it, but I dug how this film was very tame compared to the last 2 sequels that we got in this movie, but still being able to explore explore and expand the entire world of the Matrix. In fact, this does feel like a nice next chapter for this entire franchise, and I'm really digging how they were able to do that. For me, I know 2 and 3 aren't universally beloved, and some people have many issues with those, and when you go back and rewatch the third film and see where that film ended at and to where this one begins and how you get to that point, it all makes sense in its nature that we would end up here. Again, it explores the Matrix once again and adds more depth to our characters like Neo and Trinity especially. I mean, those are the 2 main iconic characters of this entire franchise alongside Morpheus, and for me, I just found those 2 really got a lot more depth, especially when it comes down to this entire universe of the Matrix and why they are so key to it all. Once again, the way that they were able to change from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3, I thought was pretty damn incredible, while all at the same time mixing organically the same story and keeping it and weaving it in, while also having a crazy and weird story that feels tame though, because the last 2 sequels I always felt, again like I mentioned, so convoluted for its nature where I didn't feel like it needed to. You could have done a couple rewrites and fixed this up, where this film has so many grandiose ideas that never feel simple, but they also feel tame at the same time. And I think there are some pros and cons to be had in there depending on where you at as a Matrix fan, but I like how they took that. And even in its execution, the action sequences, some of them even also feel a little bit tame, as it's the origin story once again for some new characters and even for some of the older ones once again. It's called the Resurrection for a reason, and again, I don't want to dive into there, but there are so many elements that again play into there, and how, in a sense, when you play a video game and you're playing as this badass character, sometimes you do have to reboot yourself back into form. Or may I say, resurrect yourself back into form.
You stupid!
It's kind of a dumb one. Let's move along. It's kind of where I want to dive into the action sequences, because this is where I'm actually really excited to talk about the movie. Because when you go to a Matrix movie, there's always some phenomenal action. And again, like I mentioned, 2 and 3, not the best movies in the world, but those action sequences are incredible in there. And in this movie, that's what I was really looking forward to, and there are some amazing ones. There's a chase sequence in the beginning of this film that absolutely sucks you back into the Matrix world. There's another one that takes place in an entire train sequence that, glorious, amazing, superb. The usages of mirrors and just the costume design, all those sorts of stylish efforts are so damn grand. And even in the third act alone, there's this whole kind of riot sequence. It is amazing to see how they were able to create that entire movie, and I was really stunned by some of the action in here. Even if I do wish that some of it, while feeling like an early 2000s blockbuster, some of it does take the ideals of today's modern blockbusters, which is like some choppy editing here and there, which I was a little bit mixed on for certain sequences, but it never totally got in the way of my viewing experience. What I also do like about the story for this one as well that I forgot to mention is the fact that they do keep in line 2 and 3 as being an important part of this Matrix world. Most franchises would have just been like, yep, those never happened, just completely ignore those. Not here. They are still an important story, and I even think that this 4th movie actually adds to why they are important to this story and makes you appreciate them just a little bit more. Also playing on all the new ideas and concepts that they're diving into in here. Again, tough to talk about without getting into spoilers, but I think a lot of you guys who are looking for those new avenues are really going to appreciate that, while at the same time appreciating how tame the film can be. I want to dive now into my performances, because Keanu Reeves as Neo, I mean, he was such perfect casting back in the day, and he continues to be perfect casting. He has to play a couple more avenues as Neo in this one, especially with where Neo is now. I love how Keanu Reeves was actually able to dive back into this role and make it seamless to where his character is now. Going on long as well, Carrie-Anne Moss is so freaking fantastic as Trinity. She might have been my favorite new returning character back into here, but truly enough, there are 2 big new standouts in here. Abdul-Mateen II, who I have absolutely loved in every single thing I've seen this dude in, and he is playing the new version of Morpheus. I loved him in here. I actually wanted more of him in here, and I think if they would have, maybe I would have even liked the film a little bit more, but he was so badass in here and brings to life what Lawrence Fishburne had done back in the day with the original trilogy. And out of all the new characters, my absolute favorite one was Jessica Henwick's Bugs. I loved this character so much that I actually wish Bugs would have been the main character. When the movie starts, you actually do feel that Bugs might actually be the main character. I actually thought that for a little bit, but then it starts to again go more towards Neo and Trinity, and that's totally fine. But I was obsessed with how Henwick played this character. Not just badass, but charismatic, awesome and one of the coolest Matrix characters that we have ever met. If we get more Matrix films down the line, I hope Bugs is front and center. There are two other actors in here that I don't want to dive into who their roles are because the trailers did a good job at also hiding this, but one is Jonathan Groff and Neil Patrick Harris. I really liked both their characters and their kind of new avenues to this and how they were able to dive into this, but this is where I do want to streamline over to my cons, because while I like their performances, this is why I don't think this film is perfect. It's near perfect as a Matrix film, but my issue with this is I do feel that the film actually needed to be longer. For 2 hours and 28 minutes, it actually pretty much flies by in its pacing, and I was very appreciative of that. But I actually think 20 more minutes would have really helped flesh this damn pacing out for certain story segments. Because while it's tame in everything of its nature, there is a lot going on in here that doesn't feel convoluted, but just certain elements that feel rushed in execution to where I'm like, I would have liked a little bit more attention to detail there. I would have liked a little bit more of a detail to there to kind of explain certain avenues and certain characters' choices to really understand and fully understand everything going on in this new Matrix film. That's actually where I feel like this film falters just a tad bit in its execution. I think that's what really would have furthered out the entire story of the Matrix Resurrections. Again, maybe I'm in the minority. Maybe you guys thought that it was perfectly executed. I think there is a big difference between the first and second act. The first act takes its time in building into all the new complex stuff that they're building in, as well as establishing everything that you remembered from the Matrix. The second half is when it starts to introduce a lot more complexity and a lot more avenues that, again, while tame and simple compared to the last two Matrix movies, they make sense, but rushed in its execution again because it's not fully executing everything that you feel like you need to, and I would have liked a little bit more time in that second half, really much diving into that instead of just going back and diving into the action and being like, this is what we have to do. I understand maybe someone will be like, well, Zach, that could be a lot of exposition. Absolutely, but for me, I think it would have really worked for the entire story of this film. Honestly, when we look back at like Matrix movies, exposition can sometimes be some of the most interesting aspects of all those entire films. The Matrix Resurrections is awesome. It's a near perfect Matrix film, and the film reinvents the franchise in a way that is meta, complex, and sleek. I want more of the Matrix now. It's a throwback to the early 2000 blockbusters, but brings all the great action you'd expect. The first half I thought was amazing, and I honestly sat there with my jaw on the floor going, this is the Matrix film I've been wanting to have for such a long time. But when the second half, while great still, its execution on certain complex manners I don't think are the best, and I think that's where the film really needed more time to pace through and bring and breathe this kind of story to life. Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss are excellent in here. Jessica Henwick is a big standout in here as Bugs, and I love Mateen II's new interpretation of Morpheus. The costume design, the sound design, all of those grand things are of course perfect because it's a Matrix film. You know you're going to get great stuff in there. The visual effects are also stunning, and some of the action is amazing. Some of it's a little bit too choppy at times with the editing, but even then I still was entertained by it. It's a tame sequel that does still dive into some more complex manners, and I very much appreciated Lana Wachowski's direction in here, and I can't wait to see what either she does next or what the Matrix franchise does next. With all that said, I'm going to give the Matrix Resurrections a B+. If it wasn't for the second half, I would have found this film to be honestly a perfect Matrix film. Again, I do have issues with the film when it comes down to that second half, but I still think it's a pretty damn badass second act, and I loved the ending of this movie. Like, the very last shot of it is perfection. Other than that, guys, I'm so curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this, so make sure to leave a comment. Look out for my Matrix ranking coming probably tomorrow or Christmas Eve. We'll see when I can get that up, but of course, guys, thank you once again for watching this, and until next time, make sure to head on over to See Armstrong Films on how to see films early, and I'll make sure to see you guys soon. So, stay classy.